Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Edelman Global Advisory and our distinguished panel of guests to explore business's perspective on delivering European energy security while maintaining global competitiveness. I'm Aaron Guiterman, Edelman Global Advisory's Chairman of Energy and Industrial Policy. As a globally connected and interdependent community of economies, we all recognize the critical importance of establishing responsible solutions and policy frameworks to ensure reliable, resilient, and affordable access to energy. Energy that both powers opportunity while delivering ever cleaner solutions to reduce emissions. It's no easy task, particularly in a transition that continues to evolve as global demand for energy increases and we work to address energy poverty. Recognizing the intermittent economic rebound the world is experiencing after COVID-19 and further pressure the illegal war in Ukraine is placing on reliable access to energy, Europe sits at an inflection point. A point where a comprehensive energy strategy needs to include scenarios that contemplate rebalancing the energy portfolio by adopting and scaling renewables while enabling secure access to lower carbon bridge fuels, such as the importation of LNG from allied nations and bringing online additional nuclear capacity. Today, the world acutely understands the imperative of reducing emissions. As outlined in the March 20th IPCC synthesis report, it's clear that pathways need to be undertaken to mainstream effective and equitable climate action that keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This will continue to take bold and ambitious thinking from all of us. The war in Ukraine disrupted Europe's access to readily available natural gas by more than 80%, and wholesale prices of electricity and gas have surged more than tenfold since 2021. A combination of tapping its strategic reserves, the timely softening of gas prices, and a mild winter staved off energy rationing and additional use of coal. But European business is not out of the woods. The war rages on and winter is 10 months away. By continuing to partner with its allies and exploring the adoption of long-term policies that enable a sound energy portfolio strategy, Europe has the opportunity to continue to meet its climate goals while keeping its economy competitive. Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. My colleague and partner, Nikolaus Schultze, EGA's inaugural chair of climate policy, will lead the discussion and take it from here. Nikolaus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Good afternoon, good morning to our North American colleagues. I would like to welcome you to our webinar today, which no doubt will solve all the problems Europe is faced with in terms of energy security, competitiveness, and climate action. Let me start by introducing our distinguished set of panelists. We have Maria van der Hoeven, who's dialing in from Maastricht in the Netherlands. She's the former International Energy Agency Executive Director and former Dutch Minister of Economic Affairs and Energy. We've got Sarah Pisco, who's dialing in from Brussels. She's Director of Strategy, Policy, Communications at ENTSOG, that is the European Network of Transmission Systems Operators for Gas. We've got Marco Baresi, who's dialing in from Brescia in northern Italy, and he's board member of Euroheat Power, and that is the International Network for District Energy. Finally, my other colleagues from the Edelman Group, we've got Stefan Borst in Brussels, who is the Edelman's Energy and Industry lead in the region, and we've got Mo Hussein, who's the President UK, who's dialing in from London, President UK of Edelman Global Advisory, who will provide some concluding remarks. Now, let's start with Maria. For decades, we were used to unlimited natural gas. The war in Ukraine, just as Aaron has said, has obviously brought a brutal end to that situation. And Europe, in a panic mode last year, sought to quickly address a multitude of issues. On one side, it sought to manage demand with certainly some success, because now we have 19% lower gas consumption than over the average 5 past years. In fact, even beyond what the European Commission requested, which was 15%. We've managed supply, and Europe's ministers have been scrambling to visit Gulf states to secure LNG supplies and build new terminals wherever they could. But these things do not happen from one day to another. And finally, Europe has been able, by and large, to shield consumers, from excessive price increases. Now, Maria, we have survived this winter. Was this all much ado about nothing?
Well, it's a very straightforward question, Nikolaus, and I'll try to answer it, but I'm also going to give you a bit more broader picture, because tomorrow's energy system in Europe and energy security in Europe is not only about gas. We are talking about this famous energy trilemma where you have energy security, sustainability, and affordability, and the three go together. And it's true, this energy supply is complex, it's sensitive for changes coming from the outside. And what we can see is that the situation in Ukraine, it's a regional conflict, has a huge impact on the global energy market. And that market is unpredictable. So it's something we have to understand. And the energy transition and the pathway to tomorrow's energy system, it takes time. My first remark is, whatever we have to do, is we have to accept that there's not one size fits all, and that diversification is key. Without diversification, it doesn't work. And it's true, energy consumption and demand is growing. Happily, the share of renewable energies is growing, so we need more investment there. But let's not forget the need for and dependence of fossil fuels will exist for many more decennia to come, also in the EU, and all IEA scenarios show that. I'm not going into that in detail, but well, when you look at the different scenarios, there's always the need for natural gas and for oil. So unless the unimaginable happens and governments worldwide collectively revolutionize their energy policies, so to be on the zero track, there is still the need for the investments in fossils in the coming decennia to secure supply and to avoid a mismatch between supply and demand. We need electrons and molecules. That's my second point. And my third point is this 2020 crisis requires us to make decisions we had not anticipated before, like expanding LNG import capacities into Europe and signing new supply contracts. So let's not forget that this was something new, but we are not there yet. But it's essential. It's essential to energy security, and it doesn't bite the energy transition. If intelligent arrangements can be made benefiting both suppliers and consumers, and an example of that is now to be seen in the Norwegian and German government and businesses to jointly innovating their energy trade relation by figuring out how to enhance gas supply security in the short term while decarbonizing in the short to medium term, and include increasing amounts of sustainable green hydrogen over time. And if this approach proves to be successful, it can act as a template for other trading partners across the globe. Now, you mentioned this winter, and what about next winter and beyond? And it's true, it was important that we had an important drop in natural gas demand in a single year. But the reasons for that, partly it was cyclical, temporary factors. There were structural factors like renewable capacity additions, and there were also the voluntary actions. So there was a historic drop in demand. But that didn't happen to EU's gas import bills. It was about 400 billion last year, and that's more than 3 times the 2021 level. And yes, Russia's share of total EU natural demand fell from 40% in 21 to below 10% in 22. But we have to recognize that the biggest risk is to lose the sense of urgency. We are not there yet. And the question is, where will the gas come from in the post-Russian area? Norway, North Africa, LNG? Well, that depends on what's happening in China. And structural liquefaction capacity is still a problem. And then we have to price. So let's not lose the sense of urgency, because that would be, I think, the biggest risk. Now, you also mentioned to shield consumers. And I think this is something that needed to be done, because we have to avoid energy poverty, also to avoid social unrest. So up till now, we had smart dynamic pricing. We had rationing supply based on the price, and that means rationing supply based on purchasing power. But 2022 proved us that this model was contrary to energy poverty. So together with utilities, politicians in Europe, but in member states, have to think about new pricing models. So no ad hoc interventions as a response to price volatility, but to encourage stable and predictable contractual arrangements between households and energy suppliers through better regulatory frameworks. And those are frameworks that should acknowledge the valuable role that wholesale markets play, even in times of scarcity, for instance, by attracting sufficient amounts of LNG to Europe. So we need these regulatory frameworks to ensure that households are not exposed to such price peaks, but rather pay more stable prices, which reflect longer-term supply costs. And this is something that's not only been said by me, but also by others, like the EU Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators in their 2022 assessment of the EU wholesale electricity market. The more interventionist the approach, the higher the potential to distort the market. And those distortions imply that wrong investment choices are likely to be made, or that much needed innovations to address changing system needs are less likely to happen. So measures that are more interventions may dampen private sector investments. We can't let it happen. And those kind of measures, if they are interventionist, those interventionist measures influence perceptions of political and or inadvertently exacerbate supply shortages. So when contemplating extraordinary measures here and now or in the future, policymakers should carefully consider the potential for these negative consequences in the medium and long term. And that goes for electricity, for power, and it goes for gas.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your insights. And I really take from what you've just said that, well, we're not out of the woods. We need to look at the next winters, which, of course, we all think is our duty. And I also took from what you said towards the end that it's important that policymakers look at new pricing models. Because in the end, we're also concerned about the stability of our political systems, particularly in Europe, with populist pressures, and that regulatory frameworks need to be built in such a manner that there are not disincentives to invest in the right technology solutions, which are also aligned with our climate policies. Thank you very much indeed again. Let me now Stefan, and let us just build slightly on this pricing issue, which Maria, you've touched upon. So with prices which seem to be heading for a permanently higher level than in other markets, and when I'm saying other markets, I'm particularly referring to the US and also to some Asian markets, to the fact that prices for industrial production in Europe are also affected by a high price in the European emissions trading system. It recently reached the 100 euros mark. And then, of course, as you've all followed in the news, the debate about how do we react to the IRA in the US, which is at risk of drawing some of the highest added value green industries into other geographies. So, Stefan, do we have a long-lasting industrial competitiveness problem in the bloc in Europe?
Well, thank you, Nikolaus. And to give you a very brief answer before I elaborate, absolutely, we do, yes. It is now becoming more apparent than it has been visible in the last couple of years. But if we, for example, look at the foreign direct investment from 2021 compared to 2019, the FDI in the EU fell already by 66%, and I'm waiting for the next figures, and I after the IRA, I'm not very confident it will look much better. The same is for greenfield investments. They have been down 15%, whereas in the same period in the United States, they're up 18%. So it is very clear that Europe is trying to maneuver a very complicated pressure triangle, and that triangle has those three sides. Are we want to tackle climate change more ambitiously than anyone else in the world. We have a strong manufacturing industry, especially in Germany, that requires high levels of baseline energy that cannot be provided by renewable sources and not in any time soon. So we will rely on other sources of energy production. Nuclear could be a solution, but for example, in Germany, that is also out of the option. So we're in a conundrum. And then we have the third side of the equation, and that is what Maria referred to, and that is social stability. If people are facing price increases, like for the wholesale gas prices in the EU have been up over 1,100% between 2019 and 2022, and people see their electricity bills and their gas bills quadruple or quintuple, that does not lead to social stability. So we don't only have a competitiveness crisis, we also have a social and a climate crisis that we need to tackle. And legislators are having a particularly difficult time finding the right answers to it, because usually they see one problem and then they try to dig into that problem with the legislation and do not always consider all the fallout that will subsequently occur. And very much like currently the answer to the American IRA, which is a very straightforward tax subsidy scheme. It's easily maneuverable, easily understandable, very effective because companies can understand it easily. The EU has now come up with the Green Deal Industrial Plan, which is a very big plan. Recently, we put forward the Net Zero Industrial Act, which focuses on one area. We have put forward a Critical Resource Act. I think the name is a little bit different, but basically we understand if you want to produce more renewable energy, we need natural resources that we don't have. So if you want to reach the goal of producing 40% of the renewable capacity within the EU, we are dependent on imports. So the question now really is, how do we react? Do we come up with the most ambitious subsidy scheme on the globe? I think that would be ill-advised, because the EU should cater to its strength, and its strength historically has been the internal market and trade relations. And these are the two pillars that it could place projects for the future on, both in ensuring that we have the natural resources to go forward, and secondly, to make sure that we develop sort of a level of autonomy that will safeguard energy prices and also help maintaining the manufacturing base that we have. But that is a very difficult task, and as we see right now, it's also the clock is ticking, and we need to move fast in order to avoid significant damage in the future.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your insights, even though they are quite depressing if you look at it from a European standpoint. But certainly there seems to be also a perception that Europe up till now has been all about sticks and too little carrots. And it seems like the IRA has precisely been the carrot that many business leaders, particularly in those high value areas, have been waiting for. So we will see how the Commission and member states will be able to balance the response to that. And of course, you touched upon the European single market. I mean, that is also an issue, because some countries will not be able, some member states will not be able to deploy the incentive systems to ensure that industries do not migrate across the Atlantic. But anyway, thank you very much, Stefan. I'd like now to turn to Sarah. And I would like to discuss with you two things that go through your infrastructure, and that is gas and hydrogen. And my two questions are, and I will throw them in now. The first one is related to Germany, and there was an article in the FT exactly 1 week ago, and the title was Germany risks running out of gas next winter. So my question there is, what is going on? And the second one is, are your members ready for to carry hydrogen? Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Nikolaus. Very provocative, but very good questions for me to present you what our members are indeed working for. So European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas stands for the cooperation of the transmission system operators of the big pressure pipelines. So those the most discussed lately in terms of energy crisis. And I must say that I couldn't agree more with what Stefan just said about Europe should build on its strength, because I think the infrastructure is, let's say, demonstrating this last year quite a resilience for which we were working for decades. And I think it is a big achievement of last year that we were able all together via cooperation of all of our members, together with the administrations, together with the European Commission, to bring the completely east to west related and orientated system towards something that is right now serving west to east gas flows. It was a tremendous cooperation and collaboration exercise that we needed to go through. And of course, with still potentially some bottlenecks, potentially some things in the infrastructure could be addressed better if we would have more capacities available there across the borders. But we were able to support all our EU member states and even support the neighboring countries, energy community countries. NSOC is tasked to monitor that situation every day, and every morning since the invasion to Ukraine started, we were having morning telcos with all Europe, being really present and coordinating exactly this to know how the flows are moving. But also, I would say in more general context, I would say that the grid story is part of this being enablers story. Grids are important because they do enable us to work for this trilemma to be potentially well landing, in a sense that we are contributing both to the competitiveness, affordability of energy if we have sufficient infrastructure, and if the markets are properly functioning, the prices are normally formed in with clear signals, and supply is offered from multiple directions. That is why this diversification, for which we were working with numerous add-ons to the gas grids as we have them right now in Europe, was so important. It was also important for the security of supply, for the technical soundness and resilience of the system, which I mentioned that I think, managed quite well. And this resilience and this reliability of the system could contribute last year to move those flows, as I said, to adverse them really. And we were about to prepare for sustainability, to move from gas to other types of molecules, hydrogen and biomethane, while we were all reminded about the fundamentals, about the security and about the pricing, and about how markets and how infrastructure need to go hand in hand together in order to ensure affordable but also available energy to consumers. So I think the grids are important because they lower the costs of both energy supply in regular situations and of energy transition. I will speak about it in a second. And they also offer the synergies that are there and that we should tackle and tap well when it comes to thinking about those grids and transformation in the future. Why am I bringing synergies? Madam van der Hoeven mentioned already this electron and molecules partnership. And I think this is exactly what our German members, you've asked about Germany, Nikolaus, and all our members are working for right now. What is important to see is that hydrogen will not come from overnight. There is, of course, a transition, a lead time to it. However, hydrogen may be this technology that could help to build synergies between our electricity and gas systems in a way that today gas to power could be sustained by the grids to tomorrow's power to gas. And this transformation, of course, takes time, but this is what our members are working on. Just to give you an example of this, let's say, how do we think about it in times of urgency? I think the sense of urgency is with us very present. Still ahead of this next winter, we are working very much for covering the storage, for covering all the agreements on solidarity between the member states, and that's all what NSOC members are doing daily. And I think out of this winter, we are quite successfully having still good levels of storage in stock. So what we are positive about is that we will have enough of natural gas resources stored before next winter, so that we can successfully be prepared from this technical point of view. Now, how this translates into the future and what we would need to think of is how to repurpose those capacities that we are currently using for natural gas to be able to use them for hydrogen deliveries. Hydrogen will be, of course, produced locally, of course, produced based on locally available resources, specifically locally produced electricity. However, it will need to be benefiting from those strengths and contribute to those strengths of internal market, and it will need to have cross-border relevance, cross-border dimension. And I think it is very much understood also by the TSOs, by the transmission system operators, that 10E, which forms the basis for our EU policies in this regard. How do we repurpose those pipelines? How do we bring the projects in the pipeline? Is very much and speedy organized and implemented right now. I can say that NSOC is preparing the 10-year network development for hydrogen. We are publishing this in a week time, and it is already first in a kind hydrogen only and purely and completely 10E policies compliant plan that would tell you which projects out of 120 that we got submitted from the project promoters are already purely hydrogen ready, by when, and in which geography they can start contributing before 2030. So that's the first on the planning side. On the implementation side, what I can say, NSOC is part of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance. We're also contributing to understanding how those energy corridors that were addressed by the EU Communication Repower could be organized, how hydrogen corridors can learn from each other, which project promoters are cooperating already and are inviting to their projects the next smaller parties that could be potentially interested in joining the infra, in joining the partnerships that could implement those hydrogen clusters, valleys, and how do we then connect the valleys into this wider European system. And last but not least, I would indeed say that the regulation is key here. Grids are natural monopolies, so they are heavily regulated industries. However, here also we need not only, let's say, the subsidization support schemes, we also need the legislation to create a favorable climate for repurposing. Favorable meaning in speed and scale, in order to be able to do it with the actors that have capacities, that have knowledge, that have opportunities to already redirect their investment from natural gas to hydrogen. And that's what is this carrot that we are hoping for in the upcoming gas and hydrogen package, so that our legal framework is sound and clear enough for us to build on the repurposing. I can tell you that repurposing is 75% cheaper than building new infrastructure. That's the comparison that our members are documenting by each and every project. And I would say that it is very important for us to tap this synergy from in the transition, to repurpose, to reuse what we have available, and what Europe was good enough to create under good cooperation between the member states, the TSOs, and across borders. Thank you very much, Nikolaus.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm sure Maria will be reassured to hear that you're capturing the sense of urgency which she referred to. And we're also reassured to see that the system is resilient and we can trust in the existing system. And you touched upon the transition from using more hydrogen, transitioning away eventually from natural gas towards hydrogen, and that repurposing would be the preferred option, possibly. And of course, that in order to achieve all that, the right regulatory framework has to be in place. So again, thank you very much. And let me now turn to Marco, who's been waiting for his intervention. Marco, I've been reading on your webpage your vision, and the vision for your organization does state, and I'm quoting, there's no more important partner than cities. We touched upon earlier on in the discussion on the consumer. So in a way, of all of us here, you are probably the closest to citizens. And so I also see that your body wants to ensure affordable and sustainable access to thermal comfort. So I have two quick questions also. Well, maybe not that quick, but the first one is, what will happen to the issue of affordability once, for fiscal reasons and other reasons, blanket public support schemes will eventually be wound down? That's my first question. And the second one is related to this dilemma between ensuring we're aligned with the EU's climate policy, but also to ensure that we supply the energy and the power that is necessary, and in your case, heat and cooling. So the second question is, did you actually put decarbonization on the back burner in the wake of the energy crisis in Europe? Over to you, Marco.
Thank you, Nikolaus. Thank you for this invitation. I heard that $550 billion is the overall amount of temporary support to cover energy crisis. So government have allocated more than 550 billions as temporary support with affordability this year. Probably we weren't other possibility to fight the emergency, but contracting additional debt to support current expenses is not sustainable in the long run. So it's simply not practical towards our children and the new generation. In my opinion, we have to touch 3 points. The first one is in short term, and as mentioned by Maria, we need a diversification of supply in order to change the dependency from Russia. We have already obtained, but we have to do more, most probably, to diversify the supply chain in order to complete the energy transition. The second point is, in the medium term, we need a strong acceleration in development of renewable and energy efficiency. And the third point is related to the manufacture. We touched the point relative to the competitiveness, and Stefan told that we need more competitiveness and production at European level. We need a stable and robust manufacture of green technology in Europe. Otherwise, we shift dependency from fossil fuel to green technologies. I realize I'm the only one manufacturer of technology in this panel, so let me spend a few words related to the Net Zero Industry Act, is the plan launched by the European Commission, but we need to be more pragmatic in terms of timing, resources, and key technologies for this exploitation. But giving back to your question related to the development of renewable and energy efficiency. Relating to the energy efficiency, it's a long time that I heard, it's more than 10 years that I heard energy efficiency is the first fuel, energy efficiency first principle, and so on. But in industry, in particular, in my opinion, is still unfinished. So we need to be more aggressive in order to reduce the consumption and to be more competitive in industry, reducing the demand. And so energy efficiency is one of the key. We talked about the reduction of gas consumption in Europe. The collapse of gas demand in Europe in 2022 is about the annual consumption of gas in Italy. We are talking about more or less 70 billion cubic meters. But only 20% of this reduction is related to the energy efficiency. The other factors are related with the warm season, reduction of consumes, different savings. So we need a strong energy efficiency plan for industry in order to make a structural this reduction. For example, there are a lot of potential in the excess heat from industrial production or from, for example, data center that could be exploited at European level. Related to the renewable, let me say that the storytelling is focused mainly on solar and wind that are strong dependency of rain resources. If you see the report, for example, the recent report from the European Commission told that in solar technology, more than 80 or 90% of materials are from rain. But there are other renewable, more stable and related to baseload, like, for example, the solid biomass. Biomass is the first renewable energy in Europe at the moment, but there is not enough perspective in the policy deployment. Solid biomass, for example, is from the forest management, byproducts, or so on, and is possible to exploit the production of electricity and heat at locally, for example, using biomass. Geothermal is another strong potential, is the heat under our feet, but it is not enough valorized in the policy. These two sources, for example, are base load sources and could do the same job of fossil combined cycle, of course, in reductive dimension. But these sources are able to operate 8,000 hours per year. So it means in the same production 4 or 5 times the same solar panel. And the way to valorize these resources, these baseload resources, is, for example, by district heating application. Euroheat and Power represent the district heating operators at European level. But district heating is nuanced in the storytelling at the moment. But is key for energy efficiency because it is possible, for example, to recover the waste heat from industrial processing or data center and to put into district heating, or to valorize local resources like biomass or geothermal. Of course, is not in short time. This is a technology that you can deploy in the medium term. But district heating has a role in energy efficiency. We have, for example, according to the Agora Energy Vend report, we have a potential of 125 terawatt-hour in Europe available by the development of district heating. It means 12.5 billion cubic meter of gas that could be saved thanks to district heating. District heating has also a role in decarbonization. The 7 EU countries with the highest national share of renewable heating and cooling has the highest share of district heating in their market. We are talking about Iceland, Sweden, Estonia, Finlandia, Latvia, Denmark, and Lithuania. So there is a strong connection between decarbonization and development of district heating. Last but not least, district heating has a role in flexibility. Think about what will happen in the next future with a strong electrification of heat, so it means more electricity demand. Strong electrification in transport needs more needs of electricity, and also we need more electricity for the production of hydrogen. What will happen most probably will be a peak of electricity demand. Thanks to district heating, it is possible to give an additional effort to the flexibility of the overall complex system. So could be a system that could play a role for the next future. That's all from my side. Let me underline that we need to force also the manufacture in Europe, not only to reply to the ERA or other, but because we have green technologies and we have a lot of manufacture available also for the process of climate change or energy security. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. And I like your concluding remark that we need more manufacturing capability and capacity in Europe. You also touched upon one of the points we mentioned beforehand, which is the competitiveness of that industry in Europe, which we said was saddled with high energy prices. And one solution you're outlining here is there needs to be more needs to be done around energy efficiency, and certainly the district heating is one area or one means which would also allow to provide some additional energy to allow the conversion into to the production of hydrogen. Thank you very much to all of you, and we're perfectly on time. I understand we already have a couple of questions from the audience. Could I ask Lindsay to perhaps read them out? I couldn't see them. Audience, yes. What are the infrastructure challenges, industrial opportunities, and energy carriers available as hydrogen carriers like ammonia, etc.? Who would like to take that? Stefan, perhaps?
I can answer that on several aspects. Well, first of all, the infrastructure challenges are quite huge because the Energy Union is now 7 years old. I think it was conceived in 2015. There is a desire for a real internal market for energy. We don't have it, not even close. So it is very hard for the EU to produce renewable energy, let's say in Spain, or get it from our neighboring countries, let's say somewhere out of Egypt, which is starting to be an energy exporter, and get it to where it is most needed, which are the manufacturing bases. So we really should significantly increase our efforts to close those gaps and make sure we can distribute energy freely. There also likely is a reform needed for the transmission of electricity. There are technological solutions on the horizon how we can transport electricity much more efficient than we do right now. But that will also incur a significant investment from member states and from the EU in order to get that done. But that now is really the task of governments, because I believe industry is moving towards net zero quite determinedly, but they need the right framework to actually get there. And for example, speaking for the chemicals industry, which I know quite well, the commitment is there, but you cannot produce chemistry without sufficient supply of energy, and all the calculations are off if that supply of energy is not green. So this is really now the task for member states, governments, and the EU. Secondly, energy carriers are crucially important. Ammonia is a very good example. It's a perfect, because of its energy density, a perfect carrier for, let's say, green hydrogen, for example. Much more easily transportable. You can ship it on containers. You can store it with some precautions. It's still a chemical substance. It's also mainly from a regulatory perspective still seen as fertilizer. So I'm very happy that in the Repower EU proposal, actually we saw that ammonia was now seen as an energy carrier, not as a pure fertilizer anymore. And it can be used, which is often overlooked, it can be used in for example, coal plants for energy production by co-firing it with coal. And with a little bit of retrofitting, actually, these plants can be retrofitted in a way that they can use ammonia. You don't need to build a full new plant, which is a huge investment. You can retrofit an existing one and then fire it with green ammonia, and you will have a significant impact on the carbon footprint. So there are these options. We just need to make sure we have the regulatory environment and also the funding in order to make these options operable and bring them on stream quite quickly.
Thank you, Stefan.
Sorry.
Yes.
I thought that maybe from the infra point of view, Nikolaus, I would also add, I agree with what Stefan said about ammonia. I think another promising carrier is also LOHC. The costs are, of course, different. Ammonia is probably more promising, but what I can add from the perspective to maybe be a little bit maybe more optimistic compared to the previous part of our round table here is that I think the project promoters are very much looking into all of those potential carriers and solutions very much right now. What I can tell you about the cooperation with ports that we have, because the first landing spots for ammonia potentially would be located in the ports. Most likely, ammonia would be the carrier across the sea transportation. So I think it is very much important. How do we think and how much do we design this hydrogen imports under different carriers, and how do we prepare the standards, including the safety standards for all those carriers, because that is part that is really missing in the ports in order to be able to organize hubs and efficient logistics for it. And I think in the transmission distribution roundtable that we are responsible for in NSOC, in the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, we can see that all of those options are very much on the table. Project promoters are building partnerships for barging, for moving this on rail or trucking. I think right now it is a matter of then finding a proper off-taker and a base in off-takers' premises that could also store these carriers efficiently and then transform them. So all of this conversion, standardization, permitting for all of that is right now what we are striving for and what is necessary to develop this.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Stefan. Was there another question? There's another question, and that is about the Net Zero Industry Act. Do we believe there is a sufficient effect on securing European energy resilience? And if not, why? But perhaps, Marco, you touched upon the Net Zero Industry Act. If you could do that briefly, because we would like Mo also to conclude. Thank you.
Yes, the question is related to the Net Zero Industry Act. The reply is no, in my opinion. As I told you, we have to do more pragmatic in timing, resources, and key technologies. Timing is missing. Resources, there is a lack of information. Key technologies are identified, like 8 technologies are the main technologies identified. But at the beginning, we are at the beginning of the process, and in my opinion, is more or less a letter of intent. So we have to do more in order to implement this plan. But resources are limited, and we need to address better in the world we think in the next 10, 20 years. So there is a lot of work to do in this sense, also in combination with industry, with the manufacturer.
Thank you very much indeed. And Maria, would you like to add?
Yes, I would like to add something. It has to do with what has been said before about our manufacturing industry. And I think this is something that tends to be forgotten a little bit, but I'm really convinced that without a good manufacturing industry, we will not achieve anything at all. And this is really something that we need new political arrangements, a new dialogue on that issue. And let me just give you one example. All our green industry, solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, etc., they can only possibly be built and strengthened thanks to the existing industry. And we have to be aware of that. And this is something I'm really missing in the whole debate at the moment on strategic autonomy and things like that. And yes, we are on a journey to a much more sustainable world, a much more sustainable economy. It takes time. And we have to be very, very careful about not ruining something before we have the new thing. And that also is important when we're talking about this just transition. You know, we have to invest in industry, in renewable energy capacity to meet demand, but you also need to invest in society. And investing in society is absolutely necessary because we shouldn't forget the human factor in energy transition. Because in the end, you know, it's all about people and about their life. So you need their support. You need their support as well to have it in cities, in local. You have to involve local governments, regional governments, to involve local communities, companies, and citizens. And this is something I can see happening in some regions already, in cities, and it should be very well to use this as an example to be used everywhere else, to be used anywhere else, because that's something that's missing, I think, at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria. I think it's important that we end actually by highlighting the fact that we cannot disconnect all the issues we've touched upon this afternoon or this morning in the US from actually society and those who are affected, who take part in manufacturing processes, and who will be the consumers, and obviously also the electorate of governments across the continent. Thank you very much. And I would now like to turn to Mo, who's been extremely patiently waiting to invite him to conclude, but also to provide a view from across the channel. You're based in London, on how to handle this trilemma of energy security, climate transition, competitiveness, and I would like to add also the social aspect, which was just touched upon before. Thank you, Mo.
Sure. Thank you, Nikolaus, and thank you for everyone's contribution so far and the questions. Really a lot for us all to be thinking about. Let me give the UK perspective quickly first, and then I will make some wider concluding remarks. But as colleagues will know, the UK government has unleashed a new net zero plan today and published a plethora of documents on energy security, energy transition, casually dubbed as Green Day here in the UK. And you can see with the content what the struggle actually is. The struggle is what we have been talking about, the tensions between balancing energy security made more and more acute by the war in Ukraine, the highly politicized issue in the UK, and I'm sure in many other markets as well, around access to affordable and reliable energy, competitiveness, as well as reducing environmental impact. This has never been as challenging or as topical as it is now. And certainly from the UK's perspective, the thing that is, let's say, top of that pile is very much the affordability and the social aspect. And that could well be because we are heading to an election, and this is something that comes up with voters on the doorstep, pretty much in every focus group and in every poll that all the big political parties here in the UK are doing. That's not to say the other bits have been ignored. So as part of the UK government's plan for this initiative, there is also a focus on reducing demand, increasing the share of domestic energy production, incentivizing private investment, speeding up planning in networks, which was touched on before. I think that would be common across different markets. We talk about all these things we want to see, all these investments, all this technology, but it has to deliver, and it has to deliver in a way that people can see and feel in their lives, as well as also some announcements on accelerating deployment of renewables. And I think if I could boil it down into a pithy small way of doing so, would probably be the 3Ds: diversify, decarbonize, and domesticate. But I think that goes to the heart of what we have been talking about here today. These issues are not just in the UK. They are in many, many different countries across the Europe, the EU, and beyond. And a few things that struck out to me from the conversations we've just had. Yes, we are talking a lot more about energy security now, and yes, the geopolitics of that is clearly very, very important, and it has been spurred by what we are seeing in Ukraine. But it also is clear that investment in this infrastructure has perhaps been dragging for a while, and we may be playing a bit of catch up on this. The affordability point, which I touched on, is heavily politicized across key markets, and that does chime with electoral cycles and where elections might be happening and what people are offering and saying and doing to try and combat that. In the UK, the government has paid a significant amount of people's energy bills for quite a long time. It's still doing so. That clearly is not sustainable over the longer term. The other thing that came across to me was energy transition takes time, and having a pragmatic approach to this is important. I think someone used the phrase affordable and available energy, and the available is really, really key here, because of course there are aspirations, there are things governments will want to do, businesses will want to do, but the system has to catch up with that aspiration as well, which does need regulation and which does need infrastructure as well. And I think a key part of this, which we didn't touch on as much, but I think is really important across different markets, is selling the economic benefits of this transition as well. I don't think we hear enough about that. What does it mean for everyday people? What does it mean for business? What is the cost implication? How intrusive might this be? That is going to be quite important, I think, in all our work going forward. And then this idea, which is, again, crucial, moving away from the short term. What about next winter? Is this the conversation we really want to be having every year? Because it feels like we often do. And how do we shift from this short-termist approach to something much, much more long-term? And I think a part of that, which we will see going forward, will be in things like different countries taking their own actions. So you have the IRA in the US. From the UK's perspective, the government has said it cannot match that. And now it's looking towards Europe in terms of what Europe is doing to try and have some mass in that and fall in line with some kind of counter offer. So I think on that note, I will draw to a conclusion and just say that I want to thank again all our panelists for their insight and their contributions, and thank you for your questions, and for everybody who has joined and taken the time to be part of this. As we said at the outset, this is one of a series of energy seminars, so we look forward to seeing you again. And in general, Edelman Global Advisory do these seminars with expert panelists on a range of geopolitical issues that affect colleagues and businesses all around the world. So please do keep an eye on the website and join again. And if anyone has any further questions for us on any of these issues, which I appreciate are complex and cannot really be covered in 1 hour in the greater depth that they deserve, then please do get in touch with myself or with colleagues at Edelman Global Advisory. But otherwise, thank you again for joining, and have a good rest of your day.